For the past few months, the constant struggle for Guadalcanal, particularly Henderson Field, ended in a stalemate for the Japanese and Americans. In order to retake the field, the Japanese Navy would cooperate with the Army. This seemingly rare occasion, of course, and so they assembled the main body under Vice Admiral Nagumo, advanced force under Vice Admiral Kondo, and vanguard force under Rear Admiral Abe. For the Americans, they have Rear Admiral Kinkaid commanding Task Force 61. Kinkaid have two carriers, the Enterprise and Hornet. Kinkaid took the Enterprise as his flagship, Task Force 16. It was composed of the battleship South Dakota and a few destroyers and cruisers as its escort. In the south, we have the Hornet. Its commander is Rear Admiral Murray, commander of Task Force 17, with a screening of heavy cruisers and destroyers. Halsey, the newly Fleet Admiral of the South Pacific, commands Kinkaid to battle the Japanese in hopes of stopping their upcoming operation. For the Japanese main body, they have three carriers, the Shokaku and its sister ship, the Zuikaku, along with the light carrier Zuiho. It's accompanied by a few cruisers and many destroyers. Its commander is Vice Admiral Nagumo, a previous commander since Midway, Eastern Solomons, and now the upcoming battle. In the south, the vanguard force is under the command of Rear Admiral Abe. He commands two Kongo-class battleships, the Hiei as his flagship and Kirishima, along with its escorts of cruisers and destroyers. In the north, for the advance force, its commander is Vice Admiral Kondo. They have two Kongo-class battleships, the Ayashio and Kurushio, with its escorts of cruisers and destroyers. They also have two light carriers, the Junyo and Hiyo. Hiyo, on the other hand, suffered a generator fire, forcing her to withdraw for repairs at Truk. Thus, only Junyo will be available. In the early hours of October 25th, an American Catalina PBY spotted the Japanese fleet, and the Americans launched its airstrike. But the Japanese, knowing they'd been exposed, withdrew northwards, and the strike air group found nothing. Soon, they went home that evening, which they lost 7 aircraft. They will try again the next day. The next morning, both sides would soon reverse course and would close the distance. Both sides launched search aircraft and prepared their airstrikes as soon as the other opponent were located. Then, both sides were located at the same time and would launch their airstrike against each other. While the Japanese managed to launch first, it would be the Americans who scored first blood. The Japanese fleet was spotted by a bunch of SBD's scout aircraft, which attracted the attention of Combat Air Patrol. But 2 SPD scout aircraft, which only carries half their bomb, managed to sneak attack on the light carrier Zuiho. The 2 dived in and scored 1 hit on the flight deck, causing fires and halting flight operations. But the first strike that was launched is now approaching the American carriers. While on the way, both Japanese and American strike spotted each other. As they were close enough distance, a bunch of escort fighter Zeros from Zuiho began diving and attacking the American strike. The rest continued to their mission. Task Force 17 knew that the Japanese strike is coming. The American radar registered the strike too late, and the Hornet's Combat Air Patrol would not have enough time to launch or even vector out Enterprise escorts. So, it will only leave to Hornet's main defense, the anti-aircraft guns. The strike group of dive bombers is led by Lieutenant Takahashi, and soon began their dives on the American carrier. A few planes were shot down as they began diving. Intense anti-aircraft fire burst through the skies. The first few Val dive bombers missed, but then she was hit by 3 bombs on her flight deck, damaging her badly. Then, at Hornet's side, a few K torpedo bombers launched their lances on the Hornet. But the carrier dodged them. Then out of nowhere, a damaged dive bomber decided to crash its aircraft towards the Hornets Island, spewing aviation gasoline fires in the flight deck. But the attack wasn't over, as Lieutenant Murata's group, an expert of torpedo attacks, launched their lances on the Hornet's starboard. They struck 2 devastating torpedoes on the carrier, and soon the engines were knocked off and was left dead in the water, burning fiercely. After the attack, the survivors of the Japanese air group were heading backwards to their main body. But then, they spotted a fleet of ships emerging from a rain squall. It was the Enterprise. The pilots reported the Enterprise coordinates on the Japanese main body. But the American air group is now approaching the Japanese surface forces. The Enterprise air group sighted the Japanese fleet, and to their disappointment, they did not find any carriers. And so, a bunch of SPDs dived into the heavy cruiser Chikuma, and they scored 1 hit on the bridge. Then a few Avenger planes launched its torpedoes on the cruiser Suzuya, but none scored a hit. A few moments later, another Avenger dived into the Chikuma, which scored a hit on the damaged cruiser's starboard. Then a few dive bombers came, which scored more hits. The Chikuma, badly damaged, was forced to depart the area. With an escort of destroyers, they returned to Truk for repairs. The rest of the fleet began to sail southeast towards the American fleet. The American air group sighted the main body of the Japanese fleet. Luckily for the Japanese, Shokaku's radar managed to pick the incoming bogies, and its firefighting squads are ready on the deck. The Zuikaku managed to hid under a rain squall, which meant most of the air group attacked the Shokaku. The group began their dives and managed to score devastating hits on the flight deck. Then a few more hits, which a blaze engulfed the flight deck. One Japanese observer stated that the carrier feels like it was hit by a massive earthquake, erupting with infernos. Approximately 4 to 6 hit the Shokaku, which forced her to depart the battlefield, with the Zuiho following from behind. The last American attacks are on a cruiser, but, like again, no torpedo hits were scored. The Zuikaku also had to depart to join Kondo's advance force. Meanwhile, the Americans was done with the Shokaku and a heavy cruiser. The Japanese airstrike was also now coming towards the American fleet. The Japanese air group under Lieutenant Seki spotted the Enterprise. Seki's air group began their dives on the Enterprise and is met with fierce anti-aircraft fire. Just a few valve dive bombers were shot down by this seemingly accurate burst of flaks. As the planes came, many bombs missed the Enterprise, but luckily for them, Lieutenant Arima, together with Arima's officer, managed to hit 2 bombs on the Enterprise, damaging its forward elevator. Then the battleship South Dakota was hit on the turret, and later, the light cruiser San Juan. Towards the side, the Japanese torpedo bombers began their run, but a Wildcat pilot managed to strike down 3 planes and damaging the 4th, which purposely crashed on the destroyer Smith. The destroyer Smith could not extinguish the fires, so the captain ordered to steer the ship to the South Dakota's wake. The fires were washed, but to the fleet's relief, the attack isn't over. As the last remaining torpedo bombers began their run, the Enterprise turned evasive maneuver, and the carrier managed to dodge all the torpedoes. The attack was over. While the cruiser was towing the carrier, the salvage team was on the verge of restoring power when suddenly the Japanese strike came upon them. 1 torpedo was enough to hit the carrier. And finally, the salvage team evacuated. Then, while leaving, more strike group came and scored 1 bomb hit on the carrier. A bit later, The Hornet was hit again, but the carrier was already empty. Fleet Admiral Halsey orders the Hornet to be scuttled, and 2 destroyers were tasked to do the job. They launched 4 to 5 torpedoes to the carrier, but the Mark 14's infamous reputation has worked again in this case. The rest of that evening, the carrier was pounded by 400 shells from the destroyer guns. While she was in flames, the Japanese Vanguard Force and Advance Force arrived on the area. The 2 destroyers have no choice but to flee the area. The Japanese pondered about taking the Hornet, but it was soon apparent that she's badly damaged and blisting. And so, they put 4 long torpedo lances on the carrier, and she finally sank at 1:35 in the morning. The Japanese managed to sink the USS Hornet and badly damaged the Enterprise. The Japanese searched the area, but it was evident that KINKAID had already fled. The Japanese, lacking fuel and with no enemy in sight, withdrew back and went north. And finally, the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands is over. For both sides, the Japanese heavy cruiser Chikuma was badly damaged, together with the Shokaku and light carrier Zuiho. For the Americans, the Enterprise was badly damaged, with South Dakota and light cruiser San Juan. But the Americans suffered a heavy blow when the Hornet was sunk in the battle. But the Japanese paid a heavy price for their victory. They have launched 200 aircraft and lost almost half of them. But the most losses were the pilots, 148 of them, a heavy blow to Japan's aviators, while the Americans only lost 26. Most of the Japanese losses are from the anti-aircraft guns. These guns managed to take out 2 of Japan's valuable commanders, Lieutenant Seki and Murata. Both were Academy classmates and they went down in this battle. The cause of their deaths is the newly invented VT fuse. If you want to know more about it, you can click this short video.